Christmas lights blinked outside, but the house felt colder than ever. I was just pouring myself a cup of coffee when my daughter Clara burst into the living room. "Dad," she snapped, "this can't go on. Either you pay rent on time or you find another place to live." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. Rent. For living in my own house, I smiled, hoping it was a bad joke. But the look on her face said otherwise. Behind her, Paul stood with crossed arms, nodding like some self-appointed landlord. The Christmas tree sparkled behind them, all red ribbons and golden lights, while her voice cut through the room like a sheet of glass. "I'm serious, Dad. Starting January, it's $2,500 a month or you move out." Outside, snow began to fall. Inside, something colder fell over me, the realization that my own blood saw me as a burden. I stared at her, not angry, not yet. Just tired. Clara's eyes didn't waver. They had that same sharp look she got from her mother when she wanted control. Except Margaret had used that look to protect, not to wound. I set my cup down carefully so it wouldn't shake in my hand. "You're raising the rent again?" I asked, voice calm. Paul stepped in businesslike. "The heating costs are going up, Harold. Inflation. It's not personal." He always called me by my first name like I was a tenant and not his wife's father. Clara folded her arms, her tone clipped. "You've had it good for years, Dad. No one else would rent a room this size for so little. We're just being fair. Fair." That word hit harder than I expected. I looked around the living room, the same one I'd helped paint when Clara and Paul first moved in. I'd built the bookshelves with my own hands, wired the light switches, fixed the old fireplace. I remembered Margaret decorating this very tree 15 years ago, humming softly while I strung the lights. Now all I could hear was the hum of the refrigerator and the edge in my daughter's voice. "All right," I said, finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "If that's what you think is fair." Clara seemed almost relieved that I didn't argue. She took a deep breath, grabbed her mug, and walked off toward the kitchen. Paul lingered long enough to give me a nod that was meant to look polite. "We're not trying to be the bad guys here," he said. "It's just the world we live in." I nodded once. "Yeah, the world we live in." When he turned away, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass door. A tired old man with gray hair and eyes that no longer expected kindness. I sat down on the couch, the same couch where Margaret and I had spent Christmas mornings with Clara as a child, unwrapping presents, laughing about silly ornaments. Back then, she would crawl into my lap and beg for one more story. Now she wanted my rent money. I rubbed my hands together to warm them, but the cold wasn't coming from outside. It was spreading from somewhere deeper, somewhere inside me that I'd thought was long numb. Lily came down the stairs a few minutes later, her hair messy from sleep, a blanket around her shoulders. "Morning, Grandpa," she said softly. "You okay?" I forced a smile. "Just a little chilly." She frowned. "Mom's in a mood again, huh?" I chuckled quietly. "Seems like it." She came over, sat beside me and leaned her head on my shoulder. "Don't let her get to you. She's stressed. The bank's been pushing her hard." I patted her hand. "I know, sweetheart. Don't worry about me." She gave me a small smile before heading to the kitchen, and I heard Clara's voice soften slightly as they spoke. Lily was the only one who could thaw her, even for a moment. I stayed where I was, watching the snow gather on the windowsill. The house was beautiful. 3 stories, bright rooms, a wide porch, and that old oak tree out front that Margaret had loved. Everything about it felt familiar, except the people inside. Sometimes I wondered if I was haunting my own life, walking through memories that no longer belonged to me. Paul came back through the hallway, pulling on his coat. "Don't forget," he said, "the electric bill's due Friday. It's gone up again." I almost laughed. Seems like everything's going up these days. He didn't catch the tone. He just nodded and left. The door slammed, and for a moment the house was silent again. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting like old hinges, and walked toward the window. The street was lined with houses dressed for Christmas, twinkling and warm. Across the road, a family was building a snowman together. The father lifted his daughter onto his shoulders to place the hat, her laughter ringing through the air. I pressed my palm against the glass. "Good for you," I murmured. "Keep that while you can." From the kitchen, Clara's voice carried. "Dad, remember to transfer the rent by Monday, all right? I don't want to have to remind you again." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I knew my role: quiet, compliant, grateful. That's what she expected. And for years I'd played along. It was easier that way. Easier to let her think I was a weak old man living off her charity than to tell her the truth that this house, every wall, every beam, every inch of it, already belonged to me. I walked back to my room on the first floor, the one they called the guest suite. It still smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. On the nightstand sat a small photo of Margaret, smiling, sunlight catching in her hair. I picked it up, ran my thumb along the edge of the frame. "You'd laugh at this, wouldn't you?" I whispered. "Our daughter, the landlord." I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the grain of the wooden floor. My hands were steady now, my breath calm. I could almost hear Margaret's voice in my head, the way she used to talk me down when the world pushed too hard. "Don't get angry, Harold. Get even quietly." I smiled at that. "You always knew me too well," I said, under my breath. Outside, the wind picked up, blowing snow against the window like handfuls of salt. I could hear Clara's footsteps upstairs, Paul talking on the phone, Lily's faint laughter drifting down the hall. The sound of a life I was no longer part of. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the tone. The way she looked at me as if I were a line item in her budget, a burden to be managed. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The next morning started like every other. I woke up before sunrise, made my coffee, and sat by the kitchen window while the house was still quiet. The smell of pine from the Christmas tree drifted faintly through the air. For a few brief moments it almost felt peaceful until I heard Clara's heels clicking across the floor upstairs. Peace never lasted long here. By 7, the house was alive with movement. Paul was already dressed for work, staring into his laptop at the table. Clara was moving around the kitchen like a drill sergeant, pouring coffee, checking bills, muttering under her breath. I'd learned to stay out of her way during mornings like this. I took my mug and kept silent. "Dad," she said finally, not looking up, "did you transfer the rent yet?" Her tone was flat, businesslike, like I was one of her tenants calling late. "I'll take care of it this afternoon," I said calmly. She sighed, tapping her pen. "Please do. I don't want to chase you for it." Paul glanced at me, adjusting his tie. "We've got the electric bill too," he added. "It's higher this month. Your share's about $350. I smiled faintly. "Of course." Clara poured herself more coffee, then turned toward me with a forced smile. "You know, Dad, we appreciate that you're trying to stay independent. Not everyone your age can manage that." I looked at her for a moment, wondering if she even heard herself. "I suppose not," I said. She nodded, satisfied, as if she'd just given a compliment. They left for work around 8. Clara grabbed her purse, Paul his briefcase, and they both hurried out, arguing about taxes before they even reached the door. The moment it closed, silence filled the house again, the kind of silence I could breathe in. I stood there for a while, letting the quiet wrap around me like an old coat. Then I took my mug and went to my room. On my desk sat an old notebook, leather-bound, its corners worn smooth from years of use. I opened it to a blank page and began to write. December 27th. Snow overnight. The house feels smaller. Clara's getting worse. The word rent still echoes. I stopped for a moment, staring at the words. My handwriting was shaky but steady enough. Beneath the note, I drew a small line and wrote, "Remember, still yours." Always was. The truth sat there on the page, quiet but solid. I owned this house. Bought it 20 years ago after Margaret died, using money no one knew existed. Back then, I'd told the kids I found a great rental opportunity because I didn't trust them not to bleed me dry. I wasn't wrong. After Margaret's funeral, Clara and Weston, my son, had come to me constantly with requests. Weston needed money to stabilize his logistics company. Clara needed help with down payments and car loans. Every time I gave a little, they came back for more. I learned quickly that helping them was like pouring water into a leaky bucket. So when I won the lottery, 1.8 million, a miracle that came too late for Margaret to enjoy, I decided to keep it secret. I took a portion, bought this house in Asheville, and told them it was a rental. They believed it easily. They always underestimated me. When Clara offered to let me move in with her family after I turned 70, I agreed. Let her feel generous. Let her believe she was helping the old man who couldn't manage on his own. The irony was almost poetic. Around 10, I went outside to shovel snow off the front porch. The air was crisp and biting. Across the street, my neighbor Mr. Rourke was scraping ice off his windshield. He waved. "Morning, Harold." "You staying warm?" "Doing my best," I said. He laughed. "Your daughter keeping you busy?" "She tries," I answered with a grin, and he chuckled, probably thinking it was just small talk. When I came back inside, I paused in the hallway. Clara's framed diploma hung beside a family photo from years ago, Margaret, me, the two kids on a summer vacation at Myrtle Beach. Everyone smiling, tanned, alive. I stood there staring at it for a long time. That photo was proof that once things had been simple. I spent the afternoon fixing a loose cabinet door and cleaning the small workshop in the garage. I'd always been good with my hands, old habits from my years as an electrical engineer. The rhythm of repairing things calmed me. I oiled the hinges, sorted screws, tuned the little radio I'd rebuilt years ago. When I turned it on, soft jazz filled the air. Margaret used to love jazz. She'd hum along, tapping her fingers on my shoulder when we danced in the kitchen. I missed that. I missed her steady presence, the balance she brought to everything. By evening, the house came alive again, doors slamming, footsteps rushing. Clara and Paul returned, both in foul moods. Paul went straight to his office to make calls. Clara started banging pots in the kitchen. I knew better than to ask what was wrong. At dinner, the tension was thick. Lily tried to keep things light, telling a story about a classmate who'd spilled coffee on her professor. Clara didn't laugh. Paul didn't look up from his phone. I smiled for Lily's sake, but even she could feel the weight pressing down. Halfway through the meal, Clara broke the silence. "Dad, we need to talk about next month." I put down my fork. "Next month, the rent?" She said, her voice sharp again. "I've been checking the local market. Honestly, what you're paying doesn't even cover half of what it costs us. We'll have to raise it." I looked straight at her, calm but curious. "How much this time?" "Maybe another 500, she said. "It's only fair." There was that word again. Fair. Lily set down her fork. "Mom, that's too much. This is adult life, sweetheart," Clara snapped. "Grandpa understands." I smiled faintly. "Oh, I understand." Clara must have sensed something in my tone because she hesitated. "It's just how things work, Dad. You live here, you contribute. We can't keep subsidizing." "Subsidizing," I repeated softly. Paul looked up from his phone. "She just means I know what she means," I said. The words came out smooth, steady. "Don't worry. I'll take care of everything." Clara frowned, unsure whether to feel relieved or wary. "Good. I'll send you the exact number tomorrow." After dinner, I retreated to my room. Through the thin wall, I could hear Clara and Paul arguing in low voices about money about me. "He's using more power than before," Paul muttered. "The bills don't lie." Clara sighed. "Just keep him in check. We'll figure it out." I sat at my desk, turned on the small lamp, and opened my notebook again. "They think they're in control," I wrote. "But they never owned this place. They only borrowed my silence." I paused, tapping the pen against the paper. For years I'd told myself the secret didn't matter, that keeping it hidden was simpler, safer. But tonight, as their voices rose behind the wall, I felt something shift inside me. I ran a hand over the old photo of Margaret on my nightstand. "You'd tell me to stay calm," I whispered. "To wait. To think it through." Her eyes in the picture seemed to hold the same quiet knowing she'd always had. And maybe she was right. Maybe it wasn't time to act just yet. But soon, very soon. Snow still covered the yard the next morning, crisp and untouched. I sat by the window with my coffee, watching the sunlight bounce off the frozen branches. From upstairs came the sound of Clara's alarm. Then the usual stomping doors opening and closing, the mechanical rhythm of a house that no longer felt like home. I used to love winter mornings. Margaret and I would share breakfast by the window, talking about nothing and everything. Now the same room felt smaller, colder, as if the walls had learned to listen for arguments. Clara came down first, already dressed for work, her hair tied back tight, a folder of papers under her arm. "Morning," she said, not looking at me. She poured herself coffee, sighed, and glanced at the clock. "You still haven't sent the transfer, right? I'll do it today," I said. "You'll have it by lunch." She nodded, still not meeting my eyes. "Good. I just don't want any delays. We've got a lot on our plate." Paul followed a few minutes later, face glued to his phone, muttering about clients. "Morning, Harold," he said absently, scrolling. "Heating bill came in. Bit higher again. You might want to plan for that." I smiled. "I'll adjust my budget." He gave a short, distracted laugh. "Must be nice to have one." Clara shot him a quick look, but didn't correct him. They both left before 8, leaving only the faint smell of perfume and burnt toast. The quiet returned like a wave, soft and heavy. I finished my coffee, rinsed the cup, and stood in the middle of the kitchen for a long moment. Every tile, every cabinet, every corner of that house had once meant something. Now it was a stage for politeness and pretense. Around mid-morning, I decided to go for a walk. The cold bit through my jacket, but I liked it. It made me feel alive. The neighborhood looked postcard perfect, snow piled neatly along driveways, wreaths still hanging on doors. A couple across the street waved as I passed. "Morning, Mr. Whitman." Mrs. Norris called. "Morning," I answered. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" She smiled. "Perfect for selling, if you ask me. The market's crazy right now." I raised an eyebrow. "Selling? Oh, haven't you heard the Chapmans are putting their house up next week?" "Asking almost $1 million," she said. "This area's booming again." I nodded politely, though my mind was already working. $1 million for a house smaller than mine. I thanked her, wished her well, and kept walking. My breath came out in white clouds, and with each step an idea that had been sitting quietly at the back of my mind started to take shape. By the time I reached the corner store, I knew what I needed to do. Inside, the old radio by the counter was playing Christmas songs that were already out of season. I bought a newspaper and walked back home, scanning the real estate listings as I went. Prices were higher than I remembered. Much higher. The house I'd bought 20 years ago for $600,000 could probably sell for almost $1 million now. Maybe more. When I got back, the house was still empty. I made myself another cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the paper spread out in front of me. The columns of numbers and addresses blurred together until one ad caught my eye. Discrete property evaluations. Private listings welcome. Call Peter Monroe. Asheville Realty Group. I tore out the ad and slipped it into my wallet. At lunch, Clara called. "Dad, did you send it?" "I did," I said. "Check your account." I heard the clicking of a keyboard. "Got it." "Thank you." Her tone softened slightly, maybe even guilty. "You know I'm not trying to be hard on you, right? It's just... things are tight right now." "I understand," I said. "Money makes people forget what matters." She went quiet for a beat. "Don't start, Dad. Please." "I wasn't," I replied, and we both knew I was lying. After the call, I opened my old notebook again. January 2nd. They're running out of patience. But I'm running out of silence. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling fan that hadn't worked in months. It was strange how calm I felt. Maybe I'd been waiting for this for years, for a reason to remind them who I was. That afternoon, Lily came home early from college. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her smile warm as always. "Grandpa, I brought you something." She handed me a small box. Inside was a new notebook, leather-bound, almost identical to mine. "Yours is falling apart," she said. I ran my fingers over the cover. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she said, sitting beside me. "You always write in that old one. Thought you might like a fresh start." I smiled. A fresh start sounds nice. She looked at me carefully. "You seem different lately. Calmer, I think." "Maybe I finally figured something out," I said. "About Mom?" she asked. "About life," I answered, and she grinned, satisfied with that. When she went upstairs, I opened the new notebook and wrote one line: "Fresh start begins soon." Then I placed it beside the old one on my desk. Evening came fast. Clara and Paul returned carrying the tension of another long day. At dinner, they argued quietly about money. Paul said something about refinancing the house. Clara said the market was too unstable. I ate my soup in silence, listening. When she mentioned the word refinance, something inside me twisted with irony. "You're thinking of refinancing?" I asked casually. Paul shrugged. "Just considering it. Might help with liquidity. It's a good asset." Clara gave him a look. "We're just exploring options." I nodded, forcing down a smile. "Of course. A house like this could fetch a good price." Clara frowned. "Why would we sell it?" "Just saying," I replied, sipping my tea. "Sometimes letting go of something is the only way to keep what matters." She didn't answer. The rest of dinner passed in silence. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat by the window in my room, the house quiet except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. I took out the newspaper clipping from my wallet, flattened it on the desk, and dialed the number. A man answered on the second ring. "Peter Monroe, Asheville Realty." "Mr. Monroe," I said. "I saw your ad. I have a property I'd like to discuss." Discreetly. There was a pause, then a tone of interest. "Of course." "What's the address?" I gave it to him. He whistled softly. "That's a prime spot. 3-story colonial, right?" "That's right." "Would you be the owner or representative?" he asked. "Let's just say," I replied, "I'm the one who knows the truth about it." He chuckled politely. "I can meet you tomorrow morning if that works." "That works perfectly," I said. After I hung up, I sat there for a while, listening to the snow tapping against the window pane. Upstairs, the faint murmur of voices filtered through the ceiling. Clara complaining about bills, Paul reassuring her they'd be fine. I smiled to myself. "You will be," I whispered. "Just not in this house." Then I turned off the light and went to bed, the sound of the wind carrying a promise only I understood. Peter Monroe arrived right on time. A black sedan pulled into the driveway just as the morning fog lifted from the street. I met him at the door, already dressed and ready. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, with the confident smile of someone who made a living selling other people's dreams. "Mr. Whitman," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Pleasure to meet you. Beautiful house you've got here." "Thank you," I said. I've taken care of it for a long time. He stepped inside, eyes scanning every corner like a surveyor. Mind if I take a few photos? I'll need to do a quick walkthrough for evaluation. Go ahead, I said, motioning him in. We've got about an hour before the others get home. He nodded, setting down his briefcase and pulling out a small camera. As he worked, I followed quietly, my hands clasped behind my back. He moved through the rooms, methodically. The living room, the kitchen, the study, pausing occasionally to jot notes. Solid structure, he said. Original woodwork, I see. I did most of it myself, I replied. He turned to me with mild surprise. Really? You built this? Every corner of it, I said softly. And they never knew. Peter hesitated for a beat, but didn't pry. Realtors learn early that silence sells better than curiosity. Well, you've kept it in excellent condition. Given the neighborhood and square footage, I'd estimate the value around $880,000 to $900,000. I let out a slow breath, pretending to be impressed. That's more than I expected. The market's hot, he said. Houses like this are getting offers within days. If you want to list discreetly, I can set it up under a trust or LLC. Keeps your name out of the paperwork until closing. That's exactly what I need, I said. No family involvement, no questions. He smiled knowingly. Family situations can be complicated. You have no idea, I replied. We finished the tour upstairs, the creak of the old staircase echoing softly under our feet. In the hallway, Peter stopped by the framed photos on the wall, weddings, birthdays, vacations. He pointed to one of Clara and me at the beach. Your daughter, yes? I said. She lives here too. Does she know about the sale? Not yet. He blinked, unsure if I was joking. I see. She will, I added. In time. He cleared his throat and moved on. We stepped into Lily's room last. It was neat, filled with books and sketches taped to the wall. Peter smiled faintly. Nice space. Bright. She's the only light left in this house, I murmured. When we returned to the living room, he packed up his camera and papers. I'll prepare the listing tonight, he said. We'll need a signature and a copy of the trust document. I'll have it ready, I said. Do you have a preferred price range? List at $890, I said without hesitation. Don't go below $840. He scribbled it down. Got it. I'll call once we're live. We shook hands again at the door. As he left, the reflection of his taillights flickered against the snow. For a moment I stood there listening to the silence after the car drove away. It wasn't guilt I felt. It was relief, the kind that comes when you've been holding your breath for years. I spent the rest of the morning in the garage fixing a loose wire on my old radio. My fingers still remembered the rhythm of work, the hum of electricity, the feel of copper, the satisfaction of making something function again. When the radio finally crackled to life, a jazz tune filled the air. Margaret's favorite autumn leaves. I leaned back on the stool, letting the melody wash over me. You'd like this, Maggie, I whispered. It's almost done. At noon, the front door opened. Clara's voice echoed down the hallway. Dad. You home in the garage? I called out quickly, covering the camera lens Peter had left on the counter. She appeared a moment later, arms folded, suspicion already on her face. Who was here this morning? The neighbor saw a car in the driveway. Just a maintenance guy, I said easily. Boiler check. She frowned. You could have told me. I didn't think you'd care. Of course I care. I just never mind. She shook her head clearly, unconvinced, but too busy to press further. Dinner's late tonight. We have guests. Guests, Paul's boss and his wife. Try to be presentable. I smiled faintly. Always am. That evening, the house filled with polite laughter and the clink of glasses. Paul played the charming host, Clara fussed over the food, and I stayed mostly quiet, sitting at the far end of the table. The boss, a heavy man with a booming voice, asked what I did before retirement. I was an electrical engineer, I said. 45 years at the city power plant. Good trade, he said, nodding approvingly. Honest work. Clara jumped in quickly. Dad's always been very independent. Even after Mom passed, he managed on his own. We insisted he move in. I watched her as she spoke all proud smiles and half-truths. They're good to me, I said, meeting her eyes. Almost too good. Paul laughed, not catching the irony. Well, family takes care of family. Yes, I said softly. That's what I used to believe. After dinner, I slipped away to my room. The laughter from the dining room faded into a dull murmur. I sat at my desk, opened my notebook, and wrote, "Listing in progress. Trust set up tomorrow." Clara suspects nothing. My pen hovered above the page for a moment before I added another line. They think generosity is measured in money. They'll soon learn it's measured in respect. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and steady. I turned off the lamp and let the room darken around me. Upstairs, I could hear Clara laughing, real laughter, not the clipped, performative kind. For a brief second, I imagined things as they used to be before resentment filled every space between us. But that version of life was gone. And the only way to honor what it once was to end what it had become. I closed the notebook, placed it on the nightstand, and whispered, "Soon, Maggie." Almost there. I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the window. It was still dark outside, the kind of cold, heavy morning where the house felt like it was holding its breath. Clara was already awake. I could hear her footsteps upstairs, the sharp rhythm of someone pacing while thinking too loud. I made coffee and sat at the table listening to the pipes groan through the walls. The house had its own kind of heartbeat. I wondered if it would miss me when I was gone. Around 8, Clara came down in her robe, holding a stack of envelopes. "Dad," she said, her tone clipped. "We need to talk." That phrase again, always the same prelude to another demand. She sat across from me, dropped the envelopes on the table, and started sorting them like a dealer preparing a bad hand. "Property taxes went up again," she said. "Insurance, too. We're getting squeezed." I took a sip of coffee. "I see." Her jaw tightened. "I know you're on a fixed income, but you'll need to increase your contributions starting next month." "How much? 500? Maybe 6. We'll split the difference if it helps." I let out a slow breath. "That's quite an increase." "It's fair," she said that word again like a reflex. "You live here, Dad. You use water, electricity? I breathe too." I interrupted quietly. "You want me to pay for that as well?" Her eyes narrowed. "Don't start with sarcasm. You know we've been covering most of the bills. It's not like we're getting rich off you." I smiled faintly. "No, you're just getting comfortable." She froze. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said, setting down my cup. "Forget it." "No," she said, leaning forward. "Go on." I looked at her face, so much like Margaret's, and yet so different. Where Margaret's eyes had been soft, Clara's were hard, calculating. "You've built a life around control," I said. "Money, people, everything. But some things don't belong to you." She stared at me for a long time before standing abruptly. "You're unbelievable. All we've done is help you, and you make it sound like we're villains." "I never said that," I replied calmly. "But I think maybe you believe it yourself." She grabbed the envelopes and stormed off, muttering something about ungrateful old men. The front door slammed, and the house went quiet again. I sat there for a long time, watching the rain trace lines down the window. Every drop looked like a second sliding off the clock, counting down to something inevitable. At 10, the phone rang. It was Peter, Mr. Whitman, he said, cheerful as ever. "I've completed the trust paperwork. We can finalize everything tomorrow if you're ready." "I am," I said. "And keep the listing confidential. My family can't know until the contract is signed." "Understood," he replied. You'll get the best deal, I promise. The market's strong right now. We discussed details for a few minutes, numbers, signatures, closing dates. He was good at his job, precise, efficient, discreet. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, relief that didn't come from approval. Later that afternoon, Lily came home from school early. She found me in the living room, sorting through old boxes. What are you doing? She asked. Just clearing space, I said. Too many things that don't matter anymore. She knelt beside me, pulling out an old photo album. Mom says you never throw anything away. Your mom says a lot of things, I replied. Lily smiled. You're not really as grumpy as she says. Don't ruin my reputation, I said. And she laughed a small, bright sound that filled the house in a way words never could. She flipped through the photos, stopping at one of Margaret and me on our wedding day. Grandma was beautiful, she said softly. She was, I said. Inside and out. She looks happy, Lily said. Like she knew exactly where she was meant to be. She did, I said quietly. And she wanted that for everyone else too. Lily looked up at me. Do you think Mom's happy? The question caught me off guard. I think she's surviving, I said. She's built her world on numbers and plans. But happiness doesn't live there. Lily closed the album gently. I wish she'd listen to you more. So do I said, then smiled. But you do, and that's enough. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking easy conversation that felt rare these days. When she left for her evening shift at the cafe, she hugged me tightly. Don't let her push you too hard. Okay? I nodded. I won't. Promise. When the door closed behind her, I went back to my room. The rain had stopped leaving behind a soft mist that made the world outside look dreamlike. I sat by the window, opened my notebook, and wrote Peter tomorrow. Clara's too busy counting bills to notice what's coming. I paused, then added, Maggie would say, revenge is a fool's errand. Maybe she's right. But this isn't revenge. It's correction. By evening, Clara and Paul were home again, arguing in the kitchen. I heard snippets of their conversation, loans, taxes, insurance. Words that used to scare me, but now just sounded like noise. Paul came into my room later, leaning against the doorframe. She didn't mean to snap at you, he said. Clara's under a lot of pressure. She's been under pressure her whole life, I said. She just doesn't know which way to push. He half smiled. You're not easy either, you know. Never claimed to be, I said. He hesitated. She worries about you even if she doesn't say it. She worries about control, I corrected. Not me. Paul sighed. Whatever you think, she loves you. We both do. Then maybe I said you should show it before it's too late. He looked at me uncertain, then nodded and left. The door clicked shut behind him, and I was alone again. I turned off the light and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere above, I could hear Clara moving around drawers, closing papers, shuffling, the sound of her trying to keep her world in order. I closed my eyes and saw Margaret instead, her smile, her steadiness, the way she'd rest her hand on mine, whenever I started to lose patience. Don't get angry, Harold, she used to say. Get clever. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. I smiled in the dark. I'm getting clever, Maggie, I whispered. Just like you taught me. The storm passed during the night, leaving a thin layer of frost on the windows. When I woke up, the world outside was white and still, as if it was holding its breath for something to happen. The quiet was almost comforting. I moved slowly, my knees stiff from the cold, and made coffee the way I always did, black, no sugar, 1 spoon of habit. By the time I finished breakfast, Clara was already on the phone. I could hear her voice from the living room, sharp-clipped, professional. Yes, Mr. Patel. We'll have the documents ready by Friday, she said, pacing back and forth. Paul sat at the dining table, his laptop open, eyes glued to numbers on the screen. When I walked in, neither of them looked up. "Morning," I said. "Morning," Paul replied without glancing my way. Clara ended her call and sighed heavily. "Dad, I need you to be home all day tomorrow," she said. "The plumber's coming to fix your bathroom. It's leaking again." "I could handle that myself," I said. She gave me a look. "No, you can't. You'll just make it worse. Please stay home and let the professional deal with it." "I've been fixing things my whole life," I said. "But sure, if it makes you feel better. It's not about feelings," she snapped. "It's about avoiding another bill." Paul cleared his throat softly, trying to calm her. "We just want to make sure everything's in order, Harold." "I'm sure you do," I said quietly. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and went to my room. The door closed behind me with a sound that felt like relief. The morning light came in soft through the window, landing on the framed photo of Margaret by my nightstand. I picked it up, tracing her smile with my thumb. "You'd hate what this house has become," I murmured. "You'd tell me to stop pretending it's still home." On the desk sat the folder Peter had given me the day before. Inside were the preliminary listing papers, all neat and ready for my signature. At the top, in clean black print, it read, "Owner, the Harold Whitman Living Trust." I stared at my name for a long time. The paper felt heavier than it should have. It wasn't guilt, it was the weight of years. I signed. Later that afternoon, I met Peter at a small cafe downtown. He was already there, laptop open, a confident smile on his face. "Mr. Whitman," he said, shaking my hand, "everything's in place. Once we upload the listing, it'll go live within 24 hours. "Keep it quiet," I reminded him. "No one in the family knows." He nodded. "Understood. The listing will be under the trust's name. If anyone asks, they'll think it's just a new owner selling their investment." "Good," I said. "Let's keep it that way." He showed me photos he'd taken of the house, each one perfect, the lighting warm and the rooms spacious. It looked beautiful, almost too beautiful, as if it had never known cold dinners or silent resentment. "You've got a gem, Mr. Whitman," he said. "This will move fast." I looked at the screen. "Let's hope so." We shook hands again, and I left feeling lighter than I had in years. Outside, the air was crisp, the kind of cold that wakes you up from the inside out. I walked slowly past shops strung with leftover holiday lights and thought of all the years I'd spent in that house, pretending gratitude, pretending peace. When I got home, the house was empty. I went straight to the kitchen and made tea. The silence was pleasant. No Clara's voice, no Paul's sighs. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of boiling water. For the first time in a long while, I could hear myself think. Around 6, the front door opened. Clara came in first, cheeks flushed from the cold, a grocery bag in her hand. "You're still up?" she said, surprised. "Couldn't sleep," I said, "thinking about things." She put the bag down and exhaled loudly. "Dad, I don't want to fight, okay? This whole rent thing, it's not about punishing you. We're just trying to stay afloat." "I know," I said. "I never thought it was punishment." She hesitated, searching my face. "You're taking this well." I smiled faintly. "You raised me to be practical, remember?" She almost smiled back, but didn't. "Good night, Dad," she said finally. "Good night, Clara." When she left, I sat back down and opened my notebook. Listing signed. Tomorrow it goes live. I stared at the sentence, letting it sink in. It didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like balance. The next morning, Peter called at 9 sharp. "We're live," he said. "The listing's already getting clicks. I wouldn't be surprised if we get our first showing request by the weekend." "Make it happen when the house is empty," I told him. "Understood." Monday morning, 10 a.m. Works perfect. I hung up, feeling an odd mix of excitement and calm. It was happening slowly, quietly, just as it should. Clara came downstairs a few minutes later, dressed for work. She handed me a note with a phone number scribbled on it. "The plumber's coming today. Don't leave until he's done." "I'll be here," I said. She gave me a tight smile and left. The sound of her car faded down the street. I stood at the window watching her drive away and whispered, "Good timing." When Peter arrived at 10, he parked a block away and came through the side gate. "Nice morning," he said. "Perfect for a little real estate work," I replied. We spent the next hour going through details. He measured rooms, checked outlets, took final photos. I made us coffee, and we talked quietly like conspirators sharing a secret. When he left, I followed him to the door. "I'll be in touch once we have a serious offer," he said. "I'll be ready," I told him. After he drove off, I stood in the hallway, the smell of fresh coffee lingering. Upstairs, I could hear nothing. No voices, no footsteps. Just the soft hum of the heat turning on. I walked through each room slowly, touching the door frames, the railings, the walls I'd painted myself. Margaret's voice whispered in my memory, "Don't fight them, Harold. Just build your peace." "I'm building it, Maggie," I said quietly. "One signature at a time." Outside, snow began to fall again, thin and delicate. I watched it through the window, hands wrapped around my mug, and smiled. The blueprint was complete. Now all I had to do was let it unfold. People think revenge is loud, shouting, slamming doors, burning bridges. Mine was quiet. It moved in small steps, as steady as the tick of the clock in my room. Every morning I made my coffee, greeted. Clara nodded when Paul reminded me about bills, and listened when Lily told me about college. Nothing looked different. But behind every polite word, the plan was already moving. On Tuesday, Peter called. "The first showing went great," he said. "The couple loved the house. They'll send an offer soon." I smiled faintly. "Good. Keep me posted." He hesitated. "You sure your family still doesn't know?" "They don't know what to look for," I said. "They've been too busy counting what they think they own." When I hung up, I looked around the kitchen. Clara had just left for work. The smell of her perfume still lingered, sharp and citrusy like the aftertaste of an argument. On the fridge was a list of expenses, mortgage, taxes, utilities. All carefully organized, all written in her neat, controlling handwriting. I chuckled under my breath. She'd spent years managing the house that wasn't hers. I rinsed my cup and wiped the counter. My movements were slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Revenge. I was learning wasn't about rage. It was about rhythm. By noon, the house was silent. I pulled a folder from my desk and checked the trust papers again. Everything was in order. The Harold Whitman Living Trust. A quiet fortress of signatures and dates that no one else even knew existed. I'd built it the way an engineer builds a circuit, precise, invisible, flawless. When the doorbell rang, I knew who it was. Peter stood outside wearing his usual navy coat and that professional half smile. "Thought I'd drop off some paperwork," he said. "Come in," I told him. He stepped inside, glancing around. "Looks peaceful." "Depends on what you call peace," I said. We went to the kitchen table and he spread the documents out. "I'll need your initials on a few things. Also, the buyers want to close fast. They're relocating from Atlanta." "That's fine," I said. "As long as it stays discreet." "Of course," he said. "Trust sales are routine. No one will connect the dots." I signed where he pointed. When we were done, he gathered the papers neatly, then looked around again, admiring the place. "You know," he said, "most people selling a house this nice are sentimental." "You don't seem like that." I met his eyes. "I already said goodbye years ago." He nodded, understanding more than he let on. "You'll get a good price, Mr. Whitman. Maybe even above your ask." I'm not worried about the money, I said. I'm interested in what happens after. He didn't ask what that meant. He didn't need to. After he left, I made myself tea and sat by the window. Snow was falling again, slow and heavy. Across the street, the Norris kids were building a snowman, laughing and shouting. Their father waved from the porch, a scene that used to make me smile. Now it just reminded me how far my family had drifted. Around 4, Clara came home early. I heard her heels in the hallway before she appeared in the doorway. "Dad," she said cautiously. "Did someone come by today? Just the mailman?" I replied. She frowned. "Funny, Mrs. Norris said she saw a man with a briefcase leaving." "Maybe a salesman," I said easily. "They're everywhere this time of year." She didn't look convinced. "You should be careful who you let in." "I always am," I said, meeting her eyes. She stared for a second longer, then sighed. "Dinner's in an hour. Try not to disappear again." "I'll be here," I said. When she left, I exhaled slowly, the first crack in the silence. Suspicion always came late for Clara, but when it came, it was sharp. I'd have to move quickly now. That night after dinner, Lily stopped by my room. She leaned against the doorframe, her face soft in the lamplight. "Grandpa, you seem happier lately," she said. I smiled. "Do I?" "Yeah. Like you're hiding something good. Maybe I am." She stepped closer, curious. "Are you planning something? Just fixing an old system that stopped working?" I said. She tilted her head. "You mean the house?" "Something like that," I said. "Go get some sleep, kiddo." "Okay," she said, still smiling. "But if it's something exciting, I want in." "Maybe one day," I said. After she left, I opened my notebook again. They're starting to notice. Clara's nervous. Good. Nerves mean cracks, and cracks let the light in. Upstairs, muffled voices rose and fell. Clara and Paul arguing again. The words weren't clear, but the tone was. Money, stress, blame. They were running out of patience with me. What they didn't know was that patience had always been my weapon. The next morning, Clara called out as she left for work. "Don't forget Dad rent's due Monday, I remember," I said. After the door closed, I laughed quietly to myself. She thought she was reminding me of responsibility. Really, she was reminding me of timing. By mid-afternoon, I got another call from Peter. "Good news," he said. "We've got serious interest. One couple from Georgia, another from Florida. The one from Georgia is likely to make an offer tomorrow." "Excellent," I said. "Let's make it happen. And Peter, keep everything under the trust name until the deal's done." "Absolutely." When the call ended, I sat in the living room staring at the fireplace. The flames were low, barely flickering. I reached for the poker and stirred them until they sparked again. Watching the embers glow, I thought about how long I'd lived surrounded by cold people pretending warmth came from patience. Later, Lily came home, her cheeks pink from the cold. "You look like you've been thinking," she said, hanging her coat. "I've been building," I replied. "Building what?" "Implin," I said. She laughed softly. "You're mysterious, Grandpa." "Not mysterious," I said. "Just methodical." She sat beside me on the couch, looking at the fireplace. "It's nice tonight," she said. "Quiet." "Yes," I said. "Quiet can be good." When she went upstairs, I stayed by the fire, listening to the soft crackle. I thought about Margaret again, how she used to say that truth was like electricity, invisible, powerful, and dangerous in the wrong hands. The clock struck 10. I closed my eyes and smiled. "Almost done, Maggie," I whispered. "The wires are all in place. Now we wait for the switch." The flames flickered, and the room filled with a warm glow. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Monday morning came quiet and gray. Clara had already left for work, Paul was in the garage on a call, and Lily was rushing to class. The house smelled of burnt toast and cold air. I sat at the kitchen table watching the second hand crawl across the clock. At exactly 10, a black car rolled up the driveway. Two people stepped out, Peter Monroe and a woman in a red scarf holding a clipboard. I opened the door before they could knock. "Morning, Mr. Whitman," Peter said, smiling. "This is Anne. She's assisting with the showing." "Come in," I said. "They're all out?" Anne smiled politely as she stepped inside. "Beautiful home," she said. "Lots of natural light." "Sometimes too much," I replied, closing the door behind them. They moved through the rooms, quiet but efficient. Peter asked me small questions as he snapped pictures. How old was the roof? When was the last renovation? How much energy the furnace used? I answered calmly as though we were discussing someone else's house. Anne opened the curtains in the living room and wrote something in her notes. "Feels warm," she said. "It used to," I said. "Once." When they finished, Peter handed me a document to sign, a standard consent form for private viewings. My name was written in neat type at the bottom. Owner, the Harold Whitman Living Trust. I signed without hesitation. "You'll have an offer soon," Peter said. "The couple from Georgia is serious. They're ready to move quickly." "Good," I said. "Let's make it quick." After they left, I stood by the window watching their car disappear down the street. The snow on the branches was beginning to melt drops, sliding down like tiny clocks, counting down to something inevitable. I looked around the living room. The light was soft, almost kind. If you didn't know the truth, you'd think this house was peaceful. At noon, Clara came home early. I heard the front door open, her footsteps firm against the hardwood. "Dad," she called. "In the kitchen," I said, keeping my voice even. She appeared in the doorway, still wearing her coat hair slightly damp from snow. "Did someone come by today?" "Mailman," I said. "Why?" She frowned. "Mrs. Norris said there were strangers here. A man with a briefcase." I took a sip of coffee. That woman's always watching everyone's business. Clara crossed her arms. "Dad, if you're talking to salespeople again." I looked up. "Clara, if I need a toaster or a vacuum, I'll let you know." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Just be careful. There are scams going around." "You're an easy target." "I bet I am," I said quietly. She studied me for a moment, clearly unconvinced, then sighed and turned toward the stairs. "Dinner at 7, she said. "Don't forget." When she was gone, I couldn't help but smile. The timing was perfect. Suspicion always came late with her. By the time she figured it out, the ink would already be dry. That evening, Lily came home and found me in the living room, tuning my old radio. "You've been quiet lately," she said, sitting beside me. "Quiet doesn't always mean sad," I said. "I know," she said. "But Mom says you're keeping things from her." I chuckled. "Your mom likes to think she knows everything that happens in this house." "Maybe she's right, maybe not." Lily tilted her head. "You sound like you're up to something." "Maybe I am," I said. "Maybe I'm not." She laughed softly. "You're impossible, Grandpa." "Not impossible," I said. "Just practiced." She leaned against my shoulder. "Whatever it is, I hope it makes you happy." "It will," I said. "Eventually." The next day, Peter called again. "We have an offer," he said, excitement in his voice. $8.85 cash. They want a quick close. "That's acceptable," I said. "When do we sign? Thursday?" "I'll handle the rest. Make sure everything stays under the trust," I said. "No names, no leaks." He chuckled. "Discretion's part of the service, Mr. Whitman." After I hung up, I went to the window. Across the street, the Norris kids were building another snowman. Their laughter drifted through the cold air, bright and free. I envied them for a moment, their innocence, their simple joy. Then I turned away. Innocence had cost me enough already. That night, Clara and Paul sat at the dining table surrounded by bills and papers. The electric company overcharged again, Clara said. And property taxes went up. Paul muttered something about refinancing. Clara shook her head. I already checked. The title's in the trust name. I don't even know how that happened. I froze in the hallway, listening. Paul frowned. Trust? What trust? I don't know, she said, tapping her pen anxiously. Maybe the previous owner's name is still in the records. I'll call the county office tomorrow. I stepped quietly back to my room, closing the door without a sound. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I opened my notebook and wrote, She's starting to see the cracks. Good. Let her look. The truth doesn't fear inspection. For the rest of the night, I could hear muffled voices through the wall. Clara frustrated, Paul dismissive, Lily trying to calm them both. I turned on the radio low enough to drown them out. A trumpet solo drifted through the room, smooth and steady like a heartbeat that no one else could hear. The following morning, Peter called again. They've increased the offer, he said. $890. The buyers want to close next week. Accept it, I said, and make sure the notice goes out right after the deposit clears. Understood. When I ended the call, I looked out the window again. The snow was beginning to melt, leaving dark streaks on the driveway. I imagined Clara coming home one day to find a letter in her mailbox, cold words on official paper giving her 30 days to leave. I didn't smile. Not because I pitied her, but because I understood what it meant to lose something you'd taken for granted. That evening, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Clara stood at the sink washing dishes, her face tight with worry. Dad, she said suddenly, you haven't heard anything strange about this house, have you? Any letters? Any phone calls? Strange, I asked. No. She looked at me like she was searching for something in my eyes. Whatever she found there, it only made her more uneasy. Never mind, she said finally. I turned away before she could see the small, quiet smile that formed at the corner of my mouth. That night, long after everyone went to bed, I sat in the dark by the window, watching snowflakes swirl under the streetlight. My phone buzzed a message from Peter. Deposit received. Contract in motion. I set the phone down and whispered, perfect timing. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, bending branches and shaking the shutters. Inside, the house stood still, silent, waiting. Everything was finally in place. The blueprint was complete. All that remained was to let the structure collapse quietly, beautifully, just as planned. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, crisp and official-looking, tucked neatly between a grocery flyer and a holiday catalog. I found it before Clara did, though I didn't open it. It wasn't addressed to me after all. It was addressed to current occupants, a phrase cold enough to make even the walls flinch. I placed it on the kitchen counter beside the fruit bowl and made myself coffee. By the time Clara came downstairs, the kettle was still steaming. Morning, she said, rubbing her eyes. Then she spotted the envelope. What's this? I shrugged, taking a sip of coffee. Probably another flyer. She tore it open. I watched her face change, confusion first, then disbelief, and finally the kind of panic you can't fake. This can't be right. Paul came down a moment later, still buttoning his shirt. What's wrong? She shoved the paper at him. It says the property's been sold. We have 30 days to vacate. Paul frowned, scanning the letter. That's impossible. We own this house. I set my mug down carefully. Do you? Clara turned toward me, eyes wide. What do you mean, do we? Of course we do. We've been paying the mortgage, the taxes. Everything. I leaned back in my chair. You sure about that? Her jaw tightened. Dad, this isn't funny. It's not a joke, I said quietly. Paul looked up from the letter. The notice says the sale was conducted under the Harold Whitman Living Trust. He blinked, confused. Wait, your name's on this, isn't it? I met his gaze and didn't look away. It's my trust, yes. Silence dropped over the kitchen like a thick curtain. The ticking clock was the only sound. Clara's lips trembled. You're telling me you sold the house? I sold my house, I corrected. Her face went pale. Your house. This house has been in our name for years. No, I said evenly. It never was. You just never bothered to check the title. You were too busy making rules. Paul's face darkened. You're saying we've been living here paying you rent for a house you owned all along? Exactly. Clara stumbled back as if I'd hit her. That's impossible. You couldn't afford this house. I smiled faintly. You'd be surprised what 20 years of silence can buy. Paul threw the letter onto the counter. So what this is, revenge? You're evicting your own family. I'm not evicting anyone, I said. The new owners are. I just accepted a good offer. Clara's voice cracked. You tricked us. You lied to us for years. I stood up slowly. You made me pay rent in my own home. You charged me for heat, for light, for water I barely used. You threatened to kick me out if I didn't pay more. Tell me, Clara, who lied first. Tears welled in her eyes, but there was anger behind them, not regret. You're cruel. I'm tired, I said simply. There's a difference. Paul's tone turned cold and sharp. You'll regret this. You think you've won, but you'll die alone, Harold. I met his glare. I already was. He grabbed his coat, muttering something under his breath, and stormed out. The door slammed so hard it rattled the windows. Clara stayed staring at me like she didn't recognize the man standing in front of her. How could you, she whispered, after everything we did for you? You mean everything you charged me for? I interrupted. You made me feel like a burden in the house I bought. You don't take care of people, Clara. You manage them. You monitor them. That's not love. It's control. Her voice rose. You think money fixes everything? You think selling this house makes you free? No, I said quietly. It just makes me honest. She turned away, shaking her head, tears streaking down her face. I hope you're happy, Dad. You destroyed this family. I didn't answer. The truth didn't need defending. When she left, the silence in the house was heavy, but clean. For the first time, it didn't feel hostile. It just existed. I sat at the table and stared at the letter she'd dropped. The black ink, the signatures, the finality of it all. It was done. Later that day, Lily called. Her voice was trembling. Grandpa, Mom's freaking out. She says you sold the house. I did, I said. But why? That's her home. It was mine, I corrected gently, before she ever moved in. There was a pause. You owned it all along, yes? Then, all that rent money stayed where it belonged, I said. In my account. She was silent for a long time. Then she whispered, I don't know whether to be shocked or proud. Maybe both, I said. Your mother will hate me for this, but someday you'll understand. I think I already do, she said quietly. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark listening to the wind outside, remembering Margaret's voice. Don't hold on to anger too long, Harold. It poisons you from the inside. I whispered into the quiet. Maybe so, Maggie. But sometimes poison's the only thing that keeps you alive. The next morning my phone rang again, Weston. I hadn't heard from my son in months. The tone in his voice was sharp, already accusatory. What the hell did you do? Dad, Clara just called me in tears. Good morning to you too, I said dryly. Don't start with me. You sold the house. Seriously, you threw her out. I sold what was mine. She threw me out first, remember? You're unbelievable, he snapped. You could have talked to us. I tried that years ago. You weren't listening then. He scoffed. So this is your big revenge, huh? Making your daughter homeless. You're sick. I felt the anger rising, but kept my voice calm. You think I did this to hurt her? I did it to stop her. There's a difference. You're pathetic, he spat. Don't ever call me again. The line went dead. I sat in silence for a while, staring at the phone. The anger faded, replaced by something colder, steadier. Resolve. That afternoon, Peter called with the update. Everything's official, Mr. Whitman. The buyers wired the funds this morning. The transaction's closed. Good, I said. Thank you. You did the right thing, he said softly. Sometimes letting go is the only way to start over. I know, I said. After we hung up, I went for a walk through the neighborhood. Snow had melted into slush, the air damp and gray. The Norris kids were gone, their snowman half collapsed, leaning like an old man in the rain. I looked back at the house one last time. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn. I whispered to myself, "Goodbye, Clara. Goodbye home." It didn't feel like loss. It felt like release. When I got back to my apartment, I poured myself a glass of bourbon and turned on the old radio. A saxophone solo drifted through the static, smooth and lonely. I raised the glass toward the empty room. To freedom, I said. And for the first time in a long time, I meant it. 3 days passed before Clara called again. I'd almost convinced myself she wouldn't, that pride would hold her tongue. But on Sunday afternoon, while I was sitting on my balcony, watching the pale winter sun sink behind the rooftops, my phone rang. Her name flashed on the screen, and for a moment I considered ignoring it. Then I answered. "Dad?" She said, her voice tight, brittle. "We need to talk. About what? About the house. About everything." I leaned back in my chair. "There's not much left to talk about. You can't just sell the place out from under us," she said. "Do you realize what you've done to me? To Paul? To Lily?" "I realize exactly what I've done," I said quietly. "You're just realizing what you never did." Her breath caught sharp like a paper cut. "You've become cruel." "No, Clara," I said. I just stopped pretending. There was a long silence. Then her voice softened, almost pleading. "Can we meet, please? Just once. No yelling, no blaming." I hesitated, then sighed. "All right. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. The cafe by the river." She exhaled. "Okay, thank you." When I hung up, I sat in silence for a while, watching the shadows stretch across the snow. Margaret would have told me to go to listen to Be Kind, but Margaret wasn't here anymore. The next morning, the cafe was half empty, the kind of quiet that belonged to people who'd run out of things to say. I took a seat by the window, ordered black coffee, and waited. Clara arrived 10 minutes late, wrapped in a gray coat, her eyes rimmed red. She looked older than she had a week ago, tired in the way only guilt can make you. "Dad," she said, sitting down. "Clara." She ordered tea, then folded her hands in front of her. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened." I nodded. "That makes one of us." She frowned. "Can you not make this harder? I'm not trying to," I said. "Go on." She hesitated, then said, "I know things weren't perfect between us. I know I said and did things I shouldn't have. But I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted to keep things under control." "Control," I repeated. "That's one word for it." Her voice trembled. "You think I don't feel bad? That night when I told you to pay rent or leave, I didn't mean it." I was angry, frustrated. "You meant it," I said evenly. "You just didn't expect me to listen." She stared at her tea, then whispered, "It wasn't supposed to go like this. I thought we'd grow closer. After Mom died, I wanted us to stay connected. I just didn't know how. Charging me rent was a strange way to show it, I said. She winced. I panicked. We were drowning in expenses. Paul's job was unstable. Lily's tuition was coming up. Everything felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I thought if I could control one thing, money, it would make the rest easier. It never does, I said. Her eyes filled with tears. Now we're losing everything. We have 30 days to move out, and Paul's furious, and Lily won't stop crying. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm begging you, help us. Just a little. We can buy a smaller place. You could lend us part of what you made from the sale. I looked at her for a long moment. You really don't see it, do you? See what that this is exactly why I kept my secret. You've turned every moment of family into a transaction. Even now when you're losing everything, the first thing you ask for is money. She shook her head, wiping her cheeks. It's not like that. It's always been like that, I said, my voice rising. You never asked how I was. You asked when the transfer would hit. You never cared if I was lonely. You cared if the bills were paid. You treated me like a tenant in my own house. Her lips quivered. Dad, please no, Clara, I said, cutting her off. You took my kindness for weakness. You mistook silence for surrender. And when I finally drew a line, you called it cruelty. She stared at me, speechless. The tears stopped, replaced by something harder. You've changed, she said bitterly. Mom would never recognize you. Maybe not, I said quietly. But Mom also wouldn't recognize the daughter she raised. That one landed. Clara flinched as if I'd struck her. She stood up, fumbling for her coat. You'll regret this, she whispered. You think you've won, but you'll end up alone. Just like now. Maybe, I said. But I'll be free. She left without looking back. I sat there long after she was gone, the untouched coffee gone cold in front of me. Outside, the river glinted in the winter sun, a slow silver ribbon winding through the quiet town. I watched it flow and thought of time, how it moves forward whether you're ready or not. Later that afternoon, Lily called. Her voice was soft but steady. Mom told me about the cafe, she said. She's upset. I'm not surprised, I said. She says you hate her. I don't hate her, I said. I just stopped letting her use me. There was a pause. You know she's wrong about you, right? You're not cruel, you're just done. I smiled faintly. You always see more than the others, Lily. She hesitated. Can I come visit this weekend? I'd like that, I said. There's plenty of space here. Okay, she said. I'll bring pie. After we hung up, I stood by the window of my small apartment, watching people hurry down the street below. Strangers with shopping bags, kids throwing snowballs, couples holding hands. All of them moving through their own stories, unaware of mine. That night, I poured myself a drink and opened the old photo album I'd brought from the house. Margaret's smile looked back at me from across the years, bright, steady, the way it always had been. You'd probably scold me, I said softly. Tell me to make peace, to call her back. The picture, of course, didn't answer. I leaned back, sipping the bourbon slowly. The bitterness was familiar, but there was a strange sweetness underneath it, a quiet satisfaction that came not from revenge, but from truth finally being spoken. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle and unhurried. I closed the album and turned off the lamp, letting the room fade into darkness. For the first time in years, I felt no guilt, no fear, just a calm certainty that whatever came next, I could face it standing tall. Freedom, I realized, didn't always come wrapped in forgiveness. Sometimes it came in the shape of an empty chair across a quiet table, and the courage to leave it that way. A week after that cafe meeting, I signed the final papers. Peter came by with a briefcase full of documents, his usual calm professionalism masking the magnitude of the moment. "Congratulations, Mr. Whitman," he said, sliding a copy across the table. "The deal is closed. The buyers wired the funds this morning. You should see the transfer in your account within the hour." I picked up the pen, the weight of it familiar and heavy. "So that's it, huh?" "That's it," he said with a smile. "Clean sale. No disputes, no holdbacks." The tip of the pen hovered over the signature line. I thought of every year, every lie, every breakfast at that kitchen table where I'd been treated like a burden. Then I signed my name one last mark to seal 20 years of silence. Peter stood tucking the papers into his briefcase. "You did well, Mr. Whitman. Very few people your age handle things this strategically." "Strategically," I repeated with a small laugh. "I'll take that." He smiled. "Enjoy your freedom. You've earned it." When he left, I sat back in the chair for a long time, staring at the empty space he'd occupied. The apartment was quiet except for the ticking clock and the faint hum of the heater. The kind of quiet that used to feel suffocating, but now felt like peace. I poured myself a cup of coffee and looked out the window. The street below was busy, the city alive in its usual rhythm. People walking dogs, buses sighing to a stop, children running past puddles from the melted snow. I wondered how Clara was handling the news. I didn't have to wait long to find out. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Her name again. I hesitated before answering. "Dad," she said, her voice shaking. "We got another letter today. It's official. The buyers want us out in 3 weeks." "I know," I said. "You knew." Her voice cracked. "How could you let this happen? Do you have any idea what this means for us?" "I do," I said calmly. "It means you finally understand what it feels like to lose a home." She was silent for a moment, then whispered, "You've become someone I don't recognize." "I haven't changed, Clara," I said. "I just stopped letting you decide who I was." Her breath hitched. "Lily's devastated. She doesn't understand why you do this." "Then maybe she'll grow up understanding the cost of greed." "Greed," she snapped. "We took you in. We gave you a home." "You took my money," I corrected. "And you gave me guilt in return. You made me pay rent for the roof I bought. You made me beg to keep what was already mine." She didn't answer. I could hear her breathing, uneven and shallow. "You're heartless," she said finally. "Mom would be ashamed." "Maybe," I said softly. "But she'd also be proud that I finally stood up for myself." The line went dead. I didn't call back. That night, Lily came by. She looked small, standing at my door, bundled in a red coat, her hair damp from the snow. "Grandpa," she said quietly, "can I come in?" "Of course." She stepped inside, glancing around the apartment. "It's nice," she said. "Smaller, but cozy. It's enough for me," I said. "Would you like some tea?" She nodded and we sat at the small table. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she sighed. "Mom's losing it. She cries all the time. Dad's angry at everyone. They've been fighting non-stop." "I'm sorry you have to see that," I said. "It's not your fault," she said softly. "They made their choices. But can I ask something? Anything? Did you really do it for revenge?" I looked into her eyes, the same warm brown as Margaret's. "No," I said after a pause. "I did it for peace. But sometimes peace comes dressed like revenge." She frowned. "I think I understand. You wanted freedom, not to hurt them." "That's right." She nodded slowly, stirring her tea. "Mom said you'll regret this. But you don't look like someone who regrets anything." "I've had plenty of regrets," I said. "But none about this." She smiled faintly. "You know, when I was little, I used to think you were the calmest person I knew." Now I think you were just patient. Too patient. Patience can be dangerous, I said. It turns to anger when it runs out. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm glad you're happy, Grandpa. You deserve to be. Her touch was warm grounding. You're the only one who still talks to me, I said with a smile. Then I'll just have to talk twice as much, she said. We laughed quietly, and for a while the apartment didn't feel so empty. Before she left, she hesitated by the door. Mom doesn't know I'm here. She'd be furious. I won't tell her, I promised. She smiled, then hugged me tightly. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, Lily. When the door closed behind her, I stood there for a long time, her warmth still clinging to my jacket. It was the first time in months I'd felt something that wasn't anger or exhaustion, just tenderness. The next morning, Peter called again. Funds cleared, he said cheerfully. I've already transferred the full amount to your account. I checked my phone. The numbers glowed on the screen, more money than I'd ever had, at once more than I'd ever need. Thank you, Peter, I said. You've been a good friend through all this. Just doing my job, he said. But I have to say, it's refreshing to see someone your age play this game better than the young ones. I chuckled. Let's hope the next move is a quieter one. After the call, I sat on the couch, staring out the window at the morning sun. The air felt cleaner, lighter. For the first time in years, I didn't owe anyone anything. Not money. Not explanations. That afternoon, I went to see a new property Peter had mentioned, a small one-story home with a wide porch and a view of the bay. Nothing grand, but beautiful in its simplicity. The realtor, a woman in her 50s, showed me around with a smile. Perfect for a single gentleman, she said. I nodded. Perfect for a man starting over. As I walked through the quiet rooms, I could already imagine it, the smell of coffee in the mornings, the sound of jazz playing softly in the evenings, Margaret's picture on the nightstand. No arguments, no rent reminders, no guilt. Just peace. I told the agent I'll take it. When I signed the papers later that evening, I realized something unexpected. The revenge had already happened, yes. But the satisfaction came not from watching my daughter lose, but from finally choosing myself. That night, as I sat in my empty apartment one last time, I whispered to the air, "Goodbye, old life. I'm done pretending." Outside, the snow had stopped. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and somewhere beyond them, a new home waited, quiet, patient, and entirely mine. Spring came late that year, but when it did, it was gentle. The air in Willow Creek smelled of wet earth and blooming lilacs, and the mornings carried that soft gold light that makes everything look new. I woke early most days, brewed my coffee, and sat on the porch of my new house overlooking the bay. The waves shimmered quietly in the distance, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something bad to happen. It had been 3 months since I'd signed the papers. The house was mine, small one-story, with creaking floors and a garden that caught sunlight in the afternoons. The neighbors were friendly but not nosy. That was what I liked best. People nodded hello, then went on with their lives. No one asked about family or money or who I used to be. Most days followed a rhythm I'd built for myself. Morning walks through the park, afternoons fixing things around the house or reading by the window, evenings with the radio humming soft jazz. It wasn't excitement I was after, it was stillness. A letter came one afternoon, forwarded from my old address. I knew the handwriting before I even opened it. Clara. The paper smelled faintly of her perfume, sharp and citrusy the way it always had. The note was short. Dad, we've moved into a new place. It's smaller, but fine. Paul found work again. Lily visits you sometimes, I know, and I won't stop her. I just wanted to say I still don't understand what you did. Maybe I never will, but I hope you're content. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer with the others. There had been 3 before it, each shorter than the last. I hadn't replied to any of them, not out of spite, but because I didn't have anything left to explain. That evening, Lily stopped by. She didn't knock. She'd gotten used to just walking in, bringing warmth with her like sunlight. "You've been gardening," she said, smiling at the flower beds. "It looks beautiful." "Trying to keep the weeds in check," I said. "Kind of like life." She laughed. "You sound like one of those old men who give cryptic advice at diners." "Age gives you the right to be cryptic," I said. "Otherwise, it'd all sound too simple." We ate dinner together, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and the pie she'd baked. She talked about school, about wanting to transfer to a journalism program upstate, about how her mother still refused to say my name out loud. "Mom's not angry anymore," she said, her voice soft. "Just tired." "I think she misses you in her own way." "I don't doubt it," I said. "But missing someone doesn't undo what's been done." "She said you were cruel," Lily added quietly. "But I don't believe that. I think you just ran out of patience." I looked at her across the table, seeing so much of Margaret in her eyes. "You're a smart girl, Lily. Too smart to let resentment run your life." She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You taught me that." After she left, I walked out to the porch again. The sky was painted with streaks of pink and orange, the kind of sunset that makes even old mistakes look smaller. I lit the porch light and watched as the bay darkened. Somewhere far across town, my daughter was sitting in her own house, probably worrying about bills or dinner or what her neighbors thought of her. Maybe that was punishment enough. Maybe I didn't need to wish for more. The next morning, Peter stopped by unexpectedly. He looked sharp as always, his car gleaming in the driveway. "Just checking in," he said. "How's retirement treating you?" "Quiet," I said. "Exactly how I like it." He smiled. "You made quite a splash with that sale." "You know, if you ever want to invest, I'm done with investments," I said, chuckling. "Money's not the point anymore." He nodded knowingly. "It never is. Not for long." Before he left, he handed me an envelope. "Just some leftover documents for your records," he said. When he drove off, I opened it. Inside were the final receipts from the sale tax confirmations and one letter from the buyers, a couple from Georgia. "We just wanted to say thank you. We love the house. You took good care of it. It feels like it was loved." That last line caught me off guard. Loved. Maybe that was true once. Maybe houses like people held on to memories even after everyone inside had forgotten how to be kind. I spent that evening walking down to the bay. The wind was cool but not harsh. I found a bench overlooking the water and sat down watching the waves lap gently against the rocks. The surface glimmered like glass, endless and calm. For years I'd thought revenge would taste sweet. But it wasn't sweet, it was quiet. It was the sound of nothing left to prove. When I got home, I poured myself a drink and stood by the window looking out at my small, peaceful street. The lights from the neighbors' houses flickered through the trees. Somewhere faintly, someone was playing an old Sinatra song. I thought of Margaret again, of her laughter, of the way she used to rest her head on my shoulder while we watched the world go by. "You'd like it here," I said softly. "No noise, no fighting, just peace." The radio played softly in the background, the saxophone smooth and slow. I raised my glass to the empty room. "To endings," I murmured. "And beginnings we didn't plan." Outside, the night deepened. I felt the air grow colder against the glass, but inside everything was warm and still. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. Some stories don't end with forgiveness or apologies. Sometimes they end with silence, and that's enough. If you've ever had to walk away from the people who took your kindness for weakness, you know what I mean? Sometimes freedom isn't loud. It's a quiet morning, a home of your own, and no one left to tell you what you owe. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? Would you have kept the secret, or would you have sold the house too? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. Because sometimes revenge isn't about getting even, it's about finally being free.